Cure.
Seattle Children's wants every child to live the healthiest and most fulfilling life possible. That includes making sure children and teens are protected from COVID-19. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and will help protect your child from illness and hospitalization. This isn't about beating the odds, it's about changing them for all kidkind. Get your child vaccinated today.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elaine Sulkin, and I'm the publisher and CEO of ParentMap. We are super thrilled to bring you what we consider to be the consortium of the greatest parenting media in the country, along with us, Chicago Parent, Metro Family in Detroit, New York Family, and New Jersey Family. It's really this group and our sponsors that allow us to bring this talk to you and this series at no cost. So thank you. And we're really excited to bring back Sam Goldstein and Robert Brooks for the extraordinary power of a resilient mindset, really backed by popular demand. On behalf of our magnificent media partners across the country, it's our collective business and our passion to really help build an inclusive, safe, educated community for our families. And we are laser focused as publishers on serving our communities. And I can say we never settle for the status quo. So before we kick off learning with Dr. Goldstein and Dr. Brooks, we have a couple of housekeeping items. So today's webinar is being recorded and it will be republished for educational and promotional usage. We also have a huge number of working parents who cannot join at this hour, and everyone who registered will receive a copy of the talk. So you can watch it later or whatever. Second of all, we really, really love the dynamic engagement that you bring. So please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and send questions our way. The format for today's lecture is I will be asking Bob and Sam questions and we will build on that. So we will be watching that continuously. We also are giving away a $100 Amazon gift card at the event, and we will announce that at the end. So only attendees who are here at the end will be in that running. Again, I want to thank our media partners, Chicago Parent, New York Family, New Jersey Family, and Metro Detroit. And I also want to thank our sponsors here in Seattle, that are Seattle Children's Hospital, Dartmoor School, Eastside Catholic School, Giddens, Hyla, Kopka Cooperative School, Thyra Health, and the Seattle Jewish Community School. So without you, we couldn't do this. So Sam is a board certified pediatric neuropsychologist and a fellow of the American Psychological Association and the National Academy of Neuropsychology. He is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Utah School of Medicine. With Dr. Brooks, he has co-authored or co-edited 14 books. And since 1980, he has served as clinical director of the Neurology Learning and Behavior Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. Bob is a psychologist on the faculty of the Harvard Medical School and former director of the Department of Psychology at McLean Hospital, a private psychiatric hospital in the Boston area. He's won numerous awards for his work, including most recently the Mental Health Humanitarian Award from William James College in Massachusetts for his contribution as a clinician, an educator, and author, and he has also served as a consultant for Sesame Street Parents Magazine. It's truly an honor and a joy to have you both back with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us back.
And thank you. This is a momentous occasion because last week in a webinar for the first time in history, Bob and I disagreed about something.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Sam was wrong, but you know.
I love that. So I thought we should kick off by just having each one of you, we'll start with Bob, just explain and define what neurodiverse means. And just take us to a level playing field with, almost 300 participants already, what that means, and then we'll turn it over to Sam.
Well, actually, if you don't mind, with the question of neurodiverse, I would rather turn it over to Sam, given the clinic he runs and the children he sees. I've seen a lot of neurodiverse, but Sam, in many ways, I feel is like one of the world's experts.
Perfect.
So Sam, would that be okay?
That's fine, because, Elaine didn't take the bait on what we disagreed on. You know what we disagreed on? Bob called his grandchildren ordinary. That they're nothing special, he said. So, but what was the context? But this relates to the neurodiverse issue. The context we were discussing.
And I'll come in later about my grandkids. Okay.
Yeah, but it was, and I know his grandkids, they are pretty exceptional. But putting that aside, what we were discussing was the fact that we're finished telling people about warning signs, what to watch for that your kid is struggling, what could go wrong. In the world we have to assume, when we look at the data over the last 70 years for mental health and physical health and educational issues in childhood, every generation, well before COVID ever started, is showing increasing vulnerability. There's something about the world we've created to prepare children for their adult lives that it's a yin and yang. Certainly there are advantages of the world our kids live in today, but there may be equal, if not greater, disadvantages to this time in terms of what's happening in the world politically and medically and just in terms of mental health. So neurodiverse is an interesting term. I haven't searched it. I think, let me be a little controversial and say, if the definition is that no two brains are exactly the same, 130 billion cells, no two could be the same, we're all neurodiverse. And but some people reserve that term for a difference that is statistically set apart, that you present in a certain way that is statistically different from most others. And see, and I kind of reject that premise that because you're different, somehow it sets you apart either in a negative or a positive way. I for one, think we're all in one way or another neurodiverse. Sure, some of us have temperaments that are more sensitive to the world. Some of us have the capacity for socialization that's better than others. Some can acquire academic knowledge faster. Some learn to manage emotions better. But I like to think we're all neurodiverse. And so it isn't a term that I use very often, but I'll leave it there.
Now, just to fill in, where we got into an interesting discussion, I don't know if this is the path you're going to take, Aileen, was we were talking about the outcome of resilience years from now. The outcome of COVID on resilience in this regard. And we got into discussion that there are protective factors that will help kids. And there are some, unfortunately, kids who don't have those. And I was talking about my own grandkids and my oldest granddaughter, who even during COVID, it had nothing to do with COVID, developed an autoimmune problem that affected her hearing. And she was a senior in high school. And one of the things I said is, she is really doing very nicely now as a junior in college, but she had excellent medical care. She had supportive parents and a community that was very supportive in that regard. I think where I get most concerned, and Sam also, is some of the kids who do not have those protective factors. But saying that, I'd just like to give a little history. In our latest book, Tenacity in Children, Sam and I talk about our wonderful collaboration that took place, and we were both very interested in resilience. And a lot of the initial research on resilience was studies of children who grew up under great adversity, in war zones, in abusive homes. Both of us have an interest in kids with learning and attentional problems. And the question was, why did some of these kids as adults, and I don't want to overly simplify this, but why were some doing much better as adults than would have been predicted? And that's what led us really to think about, how does a resilient child or adult see the world differently from one who is not? And we called it, and we made a list, and we said, these are the characteristics of resilient kids, and we called it a mindset. But one of the things that I was so much joy working with Sam is, we said, what we have learned a great deal from studying kids who have overcome, if you will, adversity. Why can't we take what we learned and apply it to any child, whether they have experienced great adversity or not? And we said, what we want to do is build up that resilient mindset. And our initial book, Raising Resilient Children, we talk about the characteristics of a resilient child. Wherever they are born, whatever their circumstances are, that would be guideposts to help parents, to help kids be resilient. And we've also, both of us, done a lot of work in schools. So we've outlined strategies teachers could use in school to help kids to be more resilient. And just one other thought, I know running on, some of the mindset theories focus mainly on achievement, grades and stick-to-itiveness and whatever. What I loved working with Sam is ours also brings in things like being resilient also involves empathy and compassion, caring, responsibility. So it's really the whole child. So I just wanted to give a little background of how we came to write that as a first book. And as you mentioned, 14 others. In addition, Sam has written about 50 other books, I think, in so many different topics. So now I will
well, I would say, first of all, that's why everyone's here, is to hear both of you run on about this topic. So please do. Okay. I think that, the first question that came in was, what is the single most important factor in developing resilience? So when you talk about creating curriculum to help teachers, we have parents and professionals on this chat today. This is your opportunity to really share the deep context of that to help parents do the best that they possibly can for their kids.
Sure. Let me lay just a little foundation and then address what you said and give you a rationale for why I address it the way, or why we address it the way we do. So most of what we do for children's mental health and educational care is referred to as tertiary, meaning they have a problem, it's causing them impairment, it's come to the attention of their parents and educators and physicians, and now we have to do something after the fact. We don't traditionally do much secondary care, meaning identifying a child who may be at risk and providing support before they fail, before they struggle. And we do very little primary care, and that's what we're arguing for, is primary care, in the sense of, I tell a story about a man who goes fishing and finds a boy floating in the water and picks him up, and sees another one and picks him up, and looks upstream, and there are thousands of children floating down the river drowning. And the man paddles to shore and tells the boys he needs to go upriver and find out who's throwing children in the water and make them stop. And the river are the risks that our children face that seem to be increasing in quantity and in severity. And the man is you and I, and the parable is really telling of, we have to prepare all children to negotiate the banks of what may be a slippery slope. And should they fall in the water, should adversity befall them, we need to prepare them to be able to swim to shore and climb out, and not float hopelessly down the river waiting for someone to take care of them. So our whole basis now, our whole push, is creating a community that focuses on what does it take to handle and deal with adversity. Now, with that being said, you ask a good question. Is there an algorithm? Meaning, is there a formula of certain experiences, ways of thinking, things adults do that in an additive way increase the probability of resilience, meaning functioning well over time under adversity with better outcome? And what Bob and I have pointed out, not just based on our experiences, one of the things Bob didn't mention is that the third edition of our Handbook of Resilience, which is a large volume of worldwide research, the third edition is about to come out. It's very rare that textbooks are in a third edition. This book has 1 million downloads a year at university libraries. So this is an important topic that people look for. So there isn't an individual algorithm. For some children, it's their sense of humor. For other children, it's their athleticism. For other children, it's their empathy, their sense of responsibility, their ability to communicate. the way to look at it, to answer your listener's question, is to focus on what occurs most commonly. And if you go on Bob's website or my website and look at the links to some of our webinars that are free to access, where we show the slides of that research and talk about what shows up. So I'll just mention one or two and Bob can weigh in. One of the things that shows up almost every time is what Julius Siegel referred to as a charismatic adult. Having someone in your life that you know is there for you no matter what. A boy told me the other day when I asked him, if you could be anybody, who do you want to be as an adult? And he answered, my dad. And I asked him why, and he answered, you just have to know my dad, he really loves me. That sense of connection, that power of connection, I think is among the most powerful. So a charismatic person in your life. The other one that I think is helpful is the other side of that is being a charismatic person for someone else. That what we find is it's not just enough to be the recipient of that kind of a relationship. You also have to be the actor in that kind of a relationship. Even if you're a kid, you have to have somebody that you serve as that charismatic person for, whether it's a younger sibling, whether it's a child in need, whether it's a friend, whether it's an elderly neighbor, whatever the age is no issue, whatever the case may be. So those are the two that when people ask, I say, you got to find those two.
Yeah. And just to build on what Sam said, the notion of a charismatic adult is important to me because some people, you hear this. I just gave a workshop for teachers. What could I possibly do and whatever? And I said, for some kids, the only moments of sanity, security, and love they may experience is in your presence. So we know their resilience is rooted in really positive relationships. And something Sam brought out, which really is a major part of theory we espouse, is that we talk about contributory or charitable activities. When I did research years ago for a book I was writing about school climate, and I asked people what are some of the most positive and negative memories they had of school. One of the most positive was when they were asked to help out. People wrote, I remember when I was asked to tutor a younger child. I remember when I was asked to pass out the milk and straws. And now more of the focus in the field of positive psychology is, do you feel there's a meaning or purpose to things? So we started to say to parents, instead of saying, remember to do your chores, use words like, I need your help. You know, words can be very powerful that way. And there's research to show that kids who are ready to drop out of school, when they are asked to read to younger kids in elementary school 2 hours a week, the dropout rate drops markedly. The other thing is, because what this gets to, as Sam introduced, is we started asking if there are these charismatic adults, as Siegel defined as an adult from whom a child or adolescent gathers strength, what do they specifically do? And one of the things is, because we believe in a strength-based model, is I think a big mistake I made as a beginning therapist is I felt people came to see me or I was consulting to schools about the kid's problem. So I could spend an hour just talking about problems. And at some point, it dawns on you that maybe after just a few minutes, you should ask, what do you see as this child's beauty, their strengths, or a term we use, their islands of competence? And so one of the things I saw was a shift in parents and teachers in terms of when you start focusing also on the strengths can be used to help with some of the problems. And that even in therapy, I started asking both children and adults, what do you see as your strengths? And, you know, some people said they don't know, some kids, and I would just say, that's okay. It's something for us to figure out. So it's not to ignore the problems, but it's to focus on strengths. And the very last thing I'll say is empathy is a key part of being a charismatic adult. That's why in our book, Sam and I have a list of questions in terms of how would you like your children to describe you? How do you think they will actually describe you? What do you intentionally say or do so they're likely to describe you in a way that you would like them to describe you? Because empathy, there's some interesting research I was looking at. When people feel you're being empathic, it actually activates parts of the brain that develop a better relationship. So I know I've gone on and I'll leave some to Sam, but there are specific things we found that we could recommend to parents to do. whether you're playing a game with a kid, whether you're disciplining a kid or whatever, that could help to develop that resilient mindset.
And let me just add one more thing before you jump in, Elaine, and that is, there are probably a lot of listeners whose children have received, quote, diagnoses. And along with a diagnosis comes a prescription for intervention, whether it's social or educational or medical. And along with that comes a still common misconception that if you focus on fixing what's wrong, you've evened the playing field. And what I can tell you from many longitudinal studies, meaning following the same group of kids over time, is that the kids who fare the best at any diagnostic group, learning disability, emotional challenges, behavioral challenges like attention deficit, even autism, the kids that fare the best over time, most commonly what they share is that they possessed other assets, other strengths, had other opportunities to take advantage, not of their liabilities, but to take advantage of their assets. And in every risk group, whatever the diagnosis is, that we've demonstrated that there's about a third who transition into adult life and do reasonably well despite whatever adversity they experience from a particular condition. And they do well not because they've had more medicine or more counseling or more services at school. They do well because they found a path to take advantage of their assets and their capabilities. And so it isn't just a feel-good message when Bob and I talk about it, and the word science has been bandied around the last couple of years. But for us, science is about a method in which you demonstrate in a reliable and valid way some kind of knowledge that you know is true. And we know it's true.
I'm only jumping in because if I were to pool all the questions together, like, and there's a lot of them, it's so much around, like when Bob, I'm going to stop you from saying, I'm going to stop going on and on, because people really want the practical on the ground tips and solutions. And I know even when I was a young parent and I would hear somebody speaking, I would take copious notes on the words that you use, the examples that you give. If that's not in your natural habit as a parent, that help us with the language, like when you give examples of playing with your kids, or, kind of go granular on that a little bit.
And let me just say, Bob should answer this, but let me just say, the reason Bob says that, I go on and on, because he was a twin, and his mother always told him, give your brother a chance to talk, give your brother, and he would always talk. So we've already resolved that in our therapy sessions. We know why he apologizes. But I will tell you, and then I'll let him talk. I will tell you that the first time I met him, I'd heard him speak a number of times, and he can tell you what the first thing I said to him was, I always enjoy listening to you speak. And as a speaker myself, I don't listen to a lot of speakers because I always learn something new. So Bob, you could say as much as you want.
Isn't he sweet? That's why everyone should collaborate and have a collaborator like Sam. I mean, that's the other thing when we talk about resilience. Sam has been in many ways like a charismatic adult. I've gathered strength from him, and probably the same. But that's wonderful. And I just want to bring that up, not as a sideline. The question is wonderful. Sam and I, in our books, and we're not here to plug books, but one of the compliments we've gotten is, like in Raising Resilient Children, or the tenacity in children, the most recent is, we give actual dialogues about what you can say or do. So like even I mentioned before, if a guiding principle is children should feel that they are making a difference in this world. Just to give you one example, it's really nice to say that was very helpful, to your child, rather than remember to do your chores. That may seem like a small point, but it's just very important. Another thing is, just to give you an example, we give a number of examples like this. Your kid doesn't do something that's right. We get frustrated as parents. It's very easy to say, see, I told you it wouldn't work. Why did you do this or whatever? But since we basically feel that being resilient. Resilient people see problems as things to be solved rather than overwhelmed by. So you want to develop a problem-solving attitude. And I know what I'm saying is easier said than done, is when a child makes a mistake or whatever, to try to be able to say to that, your child is, let's figure out what we could do differently next time. Because you want them not to feel that mistakes are experiences that are really, to them, very humiliating in that regard. So you try to set up a problem-solving atmosphere. Also, I should have learned this myself, because Sam's heard the story many times. My older son, Rich, who's very successful today, from the 8th to the 11th grade, felt homework was optional. I did not feel that, nor did his teachers. And so the moment I came in from work, and I was working at a psychiatric hospital, right? And with Dr. Empathy, the first thing I said was, did you finish your homework? Why would you start that way? He is a lovely kid, very loving. And right away, there was tension in the room. So I think it's very important when you say nitty-gritty is, think about this. When you say something to your child, this gets to empathy. How would you like someone to say it to you? What are more appropriate ways? I'll give just one more example. I'm smiling as I say this. My son, Rich, would accuse me of nagging. And I felt like saying, you know why I nag you? Because you're not doing your work. That does not go over very well. But I've actually worked with parents, and I don't want this to seem overly simple, where I said, how can you say something to your kid where they're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction? So I'm thinking the first time I tried this with the parents of a teenage boy, and they thought I was crazy at first, to ask him, do you feel we're nagging when we try to remind you? And they said he'll say yes, which he did. But then you could say, we really don't want to. So we have to figure out things we could do differently and that. And I know, again, I may be simplifying it a little in this regard, but a problem-solving attitude, to have kids not see us as judging them or being accusatory. And the very last thing is, in interviewing a lot of parents, I asked them, what do you remember about your parents? One of the most positive memories was a time alone. Family time is overrated, I think, at times. And of course, Sam mentioned I had a twin brother, so in that regard, but I still remember some very precious moments just with my mother and just with my father. And that's why in our book, Raising Resilient Children, we give examples. You could set up a special time. If it's a young kid, just 10, 15 minutes, say, when we're playing together, even if the phone rings, I'm not going to get it. Because one girl said to me, and I'll end with this, one girl said to me, I know my parents love me. She was about 7, 8, just like Sam gave the example of the boy. And I said, how do you know they love you? And this was very sweet. I said, they let the phone ring when they were playing with me instead of picking it up. So it's those little things as well that can have a marked impact. Okay.
So let me add a couple of things.
Please do, because I was going on
In
and
this
on.
granular kind of a thing. So Bob, our philosophy in terms of communication is to listen, to learn, and then to influence. And as parents, we feel a sense of often desperation, given the way the world is today, that we have to fix everything. And sometimes saying nothing is the best thing you can do. You just listen. Okay. I'll give you an example. A child comes home from school and tells the parent, I don't have any friends. Nobody likes me. And as a parent, Bob raised a few. My wife and I, we've shared 5. And you immediately want to respond, no. Kids like you. You have, and if you came to me, Elaine, and I was your therapist, and you said, Sam, I'm very depressed, and I said, no, you're not. You're not very depressed. You would go, what a lousy therapist, and you wouldn't come back. And so I think you listen, you learn, you influence by acknowledging what they're saying. I hear what you're saying, and not being too quick to offer a solution. And as Bob pointed out, you pick language that fits the child. So in my clinic, because I see so many children with brain injuries, I see children who have a lot of trouble getting from point A to point B. We call that planning problems. They don't organize well. They don't follow a plan well. They don't attend to detail well. And I make those 2 words a core component in what parents say to the child. What's your plan? What details do you need to pay attention to? Why do you think the plan didn't go well? And discuss it in very practical terms. One of the things that neither one of us has mentioned so far is that this idea of errorless learning, you grow up without ever making a mistake. I'm not sure that what kind of a person that's going to be. And mistakes are opportunities to learn. And yet as parents, when our kids make mistakes, we feel a sense of desperation. You shouldn't make any mistakes. It's again, a fascinating phenomena. So on a granular level, as Bob pointed out, take the time, listen to what your kids are saying. And the last thing I'll say is have some system to solve problems that you apply each time. In the model that a colleague and I developed here, we call it GROW, G-R-O-W. And you actually take a piece of paper and you divide it in 4 quadrants, and you start in the upper left, and G stands for the goal. What's the problem and what's the goal we're trying to accomplish? And then R stands for what's the reality of the situation? What kinds of circumstances are preventing us from reaching that goal? And so G, R, and O stands for what options do we have to try and reach that goal? Let's pick one. And W is the way forward. How are we going to evaluate whether it helps or not? A dear friend of ours who's long since retired, Myrna Schur, pioneered this kind of problem-solving research and demonstrated whatever acronym you use, it's very effective, but you have to use it in a consistent way. So when a child has a problem, you like them to come to you and say, hey, we need to grow. And you sit down and you think about the goal and the reality and the options and the way forward. That's all I have.
I know that's not true, but there's a bunch of questions that are pulling back to,
Sure.
As we always say, parents are their kids' first and most important teacher. And I think a lot of parents feel challenged by the idea of like that charismatic idea. Like, I'm not that. That's not necessarily my world. And this is where it gets so granular on the language that we use to talk to our children. Because if we were raised in a negative environment and it wasn't, the concepts that you're creating, that you're suggesting sound quite simple, but so hard for a lot of people to implement because that's not their history. And so from two ends, where you come at this, kind of like your family of origin, and that's a lot of work for yourself, to finding that charismatic, it's almost a charismatic role model for yourself as well as for your kids, I guess.
So what, I'm not sure exactly, is the question, if you come from a household where you have not grown up with parents who as loving or caring, does it make it more difficult to be that way?
Well, how do you, like, you're kind of like having to re-educate yourself.
Yes.
Like, I mean, this is what we're here for. You're helping re-educate
Right.
us on language and practice.
Yeah, first of all, the word charismatic, I almost wish Julius Siegel had not used charismatic, because it does have different meanings to different people, but its definition is beautiful. From adults from whom children gather strength. So what I would say there is, first of all, I'm always thinking of Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence. He says, look, one of the most important things is self-awareness. So you have to be aware that you are relating to your kids in ways that might not be very constructive, because some parents are not even aware of that. You know what they'll say to me? Oh, if only my kid changed, then it would be much easier. But as Sam and I talk about, we have this concept of personal control. You basically have to look at what you could do differently, not what your kid could do differently in terms of change taking place. And in the clinical situation, but anyone could do this. I'll give you one example. We're filled with, examples of a parent having to change their style. Sam mentioned briefly temperament. We know there are different temperamental styles, and there's a wonderful concept in child development called goodness of fit, that parents have to recognize the child's temperament, and they have to fit more with the child's temperament at first than expecting the child to accommodate to them. So I was referred a 7-year-old boy. I'll really quickly summarize this. One of these kids who was having trouble in school and with friends, and I asked the seminar, I always ask, about the kid's strengths. And both the mother and father immediately said he loves to draw, and he's really a good artist. He was only 7. But father looked very sad, and he said, before my son was born, I just had this wish that I had this image that I'd be out there playing football with him and, baseball and whatever. My son's not interested in sports. And then the father said, very sadly, he said, and I'm not interested in art. And he said to me, I just feel how he's only 7, we're becoming estranged. And in a very hopefully empathic way, I said to him, you think about how you can join him, because given father's relation with his own father, it hadn't worked out very well. And what is an activity? And I said, we'll talk about it the next session. Father called me the very next day and he said, I don't want to lose my son. And what I did is he signed himself and his son up for an art class in one of the museums here in Boston. He called me after the first art lesson, and you could see his voice was so joyful. He said, it was so lovely to see my son's joy. And then he said to me, and my son even was looking at my drawing and said, Dad, maybe it's the way you're holding the pencil that is not the right way. But the father laughed about that. I know that's a simple example, but it's father accommodating to the kid. And the last point I'll make about this, if people are, I always get this, I'm starting to sound like my own parent. I never liked it in my own parent. Well, we have to turn it, into problem solving. Well, what can you do? How can you cope? And I remember a couple parents, instead of asking their kid to go to timeout, they went to timeout to cool down. But it's being aware of how you're acting, being aware of the impact it's having on the child, asking what your goal is. If your goal is to have a better relationship with your kid, how can I accommodate also to them? And that doesn't mean giving in. It's like Sam mentioned with communication, validating what a kid is feeling. Like, I see you're depressed, when the kid has said they're depressed, really is validating what they're feeling. You may feel it should be different, but you're validating it, and then kids are more open to hearing us.
Let me add to that. That's why Bob and I work so well together. First, to let parents off the hook. 80 to 85% of who we are personality-wise is in our genes. We know that from identical twin studies. So twins who were reared apart at birth, adopted out, how similar they are in the Minnesota studies when 300 or 400 have been studied. But on the other hand, if I could influence 1% of the stock market, I wouldn't be here. So the 15 or 20% we influence as caregivers makes 100% difference in the quality of the child's life. That's one. The second one is to separate, as professionals, our experiences with the people we've worked with versus what a larger scale study might say. I'm just as likely to hear parents say, my parent raised me this way, and I'll never do that with my child. Mm-hmm. As I hear a parent say, my parent raised me this way, and I find myself doing it the same way. I think it's one of the great myths. Bob and I at one point was going to work on, the 10 greatest myths of parenting. That was going to be the book we wrote right after How to Be a Completely Idiotic Parent. That
he still wants to write that.
I still want to write that. It's a tongue-in-cheek book of what not to do. But it's just as likely that a child raised in an adverse household that doesn't develop a close relationship or is with a parent who's overly critical or judgmental. Sure, there's some habit, but I think it's not so much the habit that's passed along, it's the failure to learn how to have a better relationship. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of parents that I see who come from adverse childhood environments, it isn't that they're parenting the way their parents did. It's that they don't really know how, that they never had that kind of a relationship. And so it isn't a matter of, hey, you don't do what your parents did. It's more a matter of here's what developing an authoritative relationship as a parent with a child, that balance between, being the child's friend and their caregiver and their cheerleader and their confidant, but also their disciplinarian, right?
Yeah, just to add, some people, just to underline what Sam said, really don't have the skills. I remember a teenage girl, well, she was about 17, 18, an older teenager, who said she was just starting really to date. And it was very interesting. She said, I don't even know how to hold a boy's hand. This sounds insecure because I never saw my parents affectionate towards each other. And so she really wanted to be affectionate, but it was really almost a lack of skills rather than anything else. And she did not want to be like her parents in that regard. But it was such a telling statement. 17, 18, you don't know how to hold someone's hand, in a romantic way.
That's a great segue to a bunch of questions that are coming around, like, is it ever too late? Like, as a parent, I'm always at any age and stage of my kids willing and ready to learn. And then what's the opportunity, when your kid is, you hear this and you've not been shown that affection to your partner and your daughter is 17 years old, like, give us an optimistic view into that. I feel like it's never too late, but
Well, why I'm smiling. Sam's smiling too. So first of all, after writing a couple of books about raising resilient kids, we wrote a book about resilience through our senior years. So, we feel it's not too late. But why I was laughing about it, I had this image. I was giving a talk here in New England about, it was called Fostering Family Closeness and Respect. And there were people of all ages in the audience. And at the end, this woman, I can never tell ages, looked in her 70s or something. And she said, Dr. Brooks, I have a question to ask you. Is it ever too late? And I get into this intellectual thing. No, I really don't think it's very too late. And just like they said, I knew my husband should have been here tonight. So she just wanted her husband to hear this. But, I feel in our book, The Power of Resilience, which is about resilience in adults, we give examples of adults in their relationships, whatever, who can change. And part of it has to be they want to, and part of it may be that certain issues come up that they really do seek help. But I really do feel that the opportunity can be there. And we give a number of examples of that. So I have to be optimistic to feel, no, else why would you ever see an adult in therapy if,
Right.
Look how much Sam has changed since he's met me.
Tremendously.
Yeah.
And sometimes not for the better, but tremendously.
Well, not every treatment is a success. Okay.
But let me, because I heard your question a little differently, because I heard it about relationships. So I agree that what Bob was addressing was, on a personal level, if your childhood didn't afford those opportunities, is it ever too late to find those kinds of relationships as an adult, or those experiences, or to develop that mindset? No, it's never too late. That's the beauty of minds, not the physical brain, but the mind. You can always change the mind. Till the moment you pass, your mind can change how you think, how you feel, what you believe, the relationships you have with others. But I heard the question is it too late in a relationship with your child? And look, we raised a generation of children a couple of generations ago that we never allowed to make a mistake. It was, there were a number of very popular parenting experts who said, don't ever allow your child to make a mistake. Everybody gets an award for participation. But this isn't how the world works. And we are a competitive species, from the way we relate to each other to the educational system we've created. It has its advantages, and it has its necessities, and it has its disadvantages. And the reality is, if you were not a very good parent, and now you have an adult child, what you have to do is try and mend that relationship on whatever level you can have, but you're not going to go back in time. You're not going to recreate the kinds of bonds that Bob and I were talking about, that it created when a 3-year-old sits on your lap every evening and you read to them, or play catch with a 7-year-old. It's just not going to happen. And it's a very sad thing for a lot of people. but it's the reality. It is, but it's never too late to have a more functional relationship with your children.
Yeah, and just to, again, build on what Sam has said, I remember the first couple of times I saw an adult who was wanting to actually have a better relationship. One case, it was their child, another was with their parent. And I'm always optimistic, but sometimes the healthiest thing is when the relationship ends. That it was so, and again, it doesn't happen often, but I saw a man in therapy who was an alcoholic and had this very strained relation with his father, and he tried to connect with his father, and his father really didn't want it. And I remember the session he came in and he said, "I'm finally free. I did what I could do." And he was free. And he said, "I can now focus on my own marriage and my kids." And so they may be the rare cases, but someone once said to me, "So did you consider that a treatment success because he became estranged from his father?" And I said, in that particular situation,
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
Because he said for whatever age he was, for 42 years, I wanted my father to accept me. And now I know he will not, and I could move on.
You know, I rarely am on a talk like this and I'm plugging a book, but the number of questions that people are asking, like, how do we gain these parenting skills, so on and so forth, we are assuming people that are on here are taking this very seriously. I can feel it by the level of questions, and you're not going to change your parenting skills in a 45, 50-minute talk. And I really urge, like, you know, the sitting down and highlighting text and examples in a book that you know, that you guys recommend is really imperative. So I'm just saying that to the audience, number one. Number two, yes, everybody will get the recording of this. That will happen just because you registered. And now there's a question directly to Dr. Sam. You have said that experience trumps genetics and that our interactions with children are the ordinary magic that makes the difference. What are habits and interactions that set the foundation for kids learning to cope with adversity and solve problems? And then I'm going to layer that with, there's a number of questions that are like, what if my kid is neurodiverse? You know, you know, the obvious solution, you know, recommendations are even more challenging.
Yeah, let me first give credit where credit is due. That term you used, ordinary magic, is Ann Maston's term. That's all we have is our intellectual property. She coined that term to describe the fact that children who overcome adversity or function well under adversity don't necessarily have special qualities. They have the very same qualities other children have, but they're afforded opportunities to develop them and harness them and use them. You know, it's such a broad question that you ask. You prefaced it with it takes a treatise to really develop an appreciation and an understanding of what to do, and not every strategy fits every parent's style, or which is why, you know, I refer you back to raising resilient children, or nurturing resilience in our children, or tenacity, which we've talked about before, these 7 instincts that we think make us human, that we feel are critical in nurturing in children. But we come full circle back to where we started, neurodiverse, and see how the term is being used. It's being used to say, my child is an exception. And the strategies and ideas that work for other children aren't going to work for my child. Well, I can tell you, one, that's not true. And that the very same strategies we're talking about, because they are ordinary magic, and because we have demonstrated they're equally powerful, regardless of what the child's challenge is or what their neurodiversity may be. What this parent is asking is, are there some additional things you need to do? I've already alluded to that. If a child has problems with planning, then you have to attend to that. And their failure to follow through may not reflect a lack of knowing what to do or a lack of a willpower to do it, but an inability to organize themselves to follow through. And so for me, it's, you first have to know your child. Bob pointed out, some children's temperament leads them to respond to the world in a certain way. Some children's level of language development requires that you communicate with them in a different way. Some children's just innate sense of worry or feelings of hopelessness require that they're going to have a more adverse response to everyday events. And we have to avoid pathologizing or demonizing or moralizing that. You know, maybe the worst thing we ever did in the late 1950s was decide children are as deserving of mental health and related diagnoses as adults. We maybe should have left it right where it was. Kids have some challenges and we should help them without pathologizing or demonizing them. It's an interesting history how managed care and our educational system has pushed pathology, not in a way to celebrate neurodiversity, but in a way that I think causes more harm than good when, quote, a child with neurodiversity tries to survive in school or on the playground or in the family.
And I just want to mention this to show the application. Again, I don't want to be looking like we're booksellers here, but Sam and I spent time writing a book, Raising Resilient Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders. So we took the application, the guidepost for resilient mindset, but we gave examples if a child is on the autism spectrum, how they can be adapted. We feel they could be adapted for, you know, all kids. What parents have to look at is, okay, what are the guideposts that really indicate a child is more resilient? What are those skills? And they have to do with different skills as well as, I'll say, social emotional skills like compassion and caring. And then in any situation, how do we apply it? But as Sam really emphasized, with every kid, it may be a little different. No, the ones, Chess and Thomas, who wrote a lot about temperament, their book was called Know Your Child. And so you know your child and you apply these strategies in a certain way. It's not like one strategy is going to work for everyone. You have to really modify it for your kid.
I also think it's important for parents to keep in mind that biology is not destiny.
Mm-hmm.
It affects probability. And your child, if they are neurodiverse and they receive a diagnosis, we have a tendency to say the autistic child, the depressed child, the learning disabled child, who wants their weakest link as a label in front of who they are? They are not those diagnoses. And even children with those neurodiversities share more qualities with the general population of children. I mean, that's what we've argued, not that we don't help children with challenges manage and overcome those challenges, but we don't lose sight of what really makes a difference long-term, which is their assets. And when special education first came about and we wrote educational plans, IEPs, we started with strengths. And every IEP had a list of the student's strengths and then their challenges. And nowadays, most IEPs don't have a place for strengths. It's not even discussed. We're so focused on fixing that we've lost sight of what really makes a difference, whether you're neurodiverse or what would be the opposite of neurodiverse, neuroboring maybe, neuroidentical, or whatever. It doesn't make a difference. Whatever the case is, Bob and I feel we've got to step back and rethink how we're preparing children for their adult lives, because the data is arguing that every generation of kids is at greater risk despite all of our efforts.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple housekeeping things. First, I just want to announce we have an Amazon gift card winner that needs to respond to Brenna Annalisa Sheebley. Congratulations. 2, we're going to put up a little survey just to get where people are coming from. And 3, another bucket of questions that is coming is even in the best of families where you have parents who agree on most things, you have such different styles. And then you are co-parenting and you have multiple houses. Can you guys give a little coaching on how to set up parents for better success when there's discord among styles?
Styles within the same household or styles in different households?
Both. I mean, it's hard enough in the same household. It's that much harder not in the same household, but both of those questions are coming up.
And I'll jump in, Bob, but not in the same household. That's why they're not in the same household, typically because one has mental health problems, one has other kinds of life problems. It's a very challenging situation. A lot of times I can't get one or the other parent to participate. The same thing in a divorce situation where a child has developmental needs. But in the same household, oh, I'm very good at trying to find a common ground. Again, in my clinic, every child starts with a very in-depth evaluation. We see Job's children, they have complicated problems. We do a very involved evaluation, and I can always find some common ground, pointing out, I just did it yesterday. Each parent filled out some behavioral questionnaires, and clearly one parent saw the child as having a lot more trouble. But the way I demonstrated it was to say, you two agree on the child's problems. What you disagree on is the severity at which those problems present. And that makes sense to me because you, Dad, don't see it as much because you're gone at work and Mom deals with it more often. And I immediately looked to try and create a bridge so that the two of them could say, okay, we agree, this is what's going on. And it comes up with intervention about medicine or about counseling as well. Let me tell you one other thing. So Bob and I are going to give away 3 of our tenacity books, but we don't know who to give them to. So you have to find 3 people who are here on this panel today, send me their addresses, and Bob and I'll send a tenacity book to each of them.
We will absolutely. That is really generous.
Can I add just
Go
one
ahead.
point to what Sam said, because it was such
Yeah.
his point was so important, and thank you, Sam. We love giving away books. What Sam was talking about, and I want to word it a little differently. When I've worked with parents who, whether they're in a different house, as long as they could come in together, because some can't, or they're in the same house, is I always like to ask, what do you most want for your child, or what is your goal? And what I find is they may have similar goals. As Sam said, where they differ is the best way to reach those goals. So I like to put in terms of, I see you have some of the same goals. Where you differ is the strategies to use to reach these goals. And I have found when you put in terms of, that's why it's called a joining technique. It's more important to focus on what they agree with rather than what they disagree with, and to put in then in terms of problem solving terms. So parents both say, I want my kids to be more responsible. I'll say, yes, but look how each of you, how you want that to occur. Let's look at then if we could develop strategies that both of you are more comfortable with. So I always describe to people the notion of joining techniques. You join around certain goals to work towards strategies that may meet these goals.
Outstanding. I don't know if either of you have a closing thought. I can't believe how fast we get to the hour when we're talking to you guys. I just really encourage, parents feel slightly tortured, in the sense that they want more, but, your books surely offer up, more detail, and we'll have Sam and Bob back, of course.
Yeah, I'll give Bob the final say. My 2 cents worth is it's an amazing phenomena, the resilience of a child in forgiving and accepting parents. I call it the puppy phenomena because your puppy's like that too, right? One mistake, 2 mistakes, yelling at your kid once in a while, it's not the end of the world. It's the sum total of your interactions with your child that really count. And what parents have to take advantage of is that sense of attachment that most kids have. And you really have to work to screw it up. Parents think, oh, I didn't do this right, or I didn't do that right, or I have to be perfect. But you really have to go out of your way to screw it up. And I would suspect that the majority of the parents who take the time to get on or to listen to this, mostly this message isn't for them because they've already accepted that responsibility. It's for the parents that we have trouble accessing, the maybe 10 or 20% of parents who are more authoritarian or laissez-faire, who really don't take responsibility for their role. And how we access those parents over time continues to be a challenge.
Yeah.
I'll just underscore what Sam said. that most kids grow up to be very lovely adults. That doesn't mean they don't have problems, whatever. But if the basic household is one where there's caring expressed and empathy, kids learn to really forgive us, just like we probably forgave our parents for certain things in that regard.
And you know, the beauty of our book, Tenacity, and the research around it is that responsibility, empathy, a social conscience, communication, problem solving, altruism, these are all valued behaviors that for a long time we thought kids had to be taught step by step how to engage in those behaviors. And now we know children will exhibit those behaviors spontaneously if given the opportunity to do it. So we really are proposing a very different way of raising kids.
Fantastic. Well, we hope you guys will join us again. Invaluable. Really, really, really appreciate it. And we have many requests we'll select 3 winners for the books and we'll share that with you.
Yeah.
But thank you both so very much.
The pleasure was
We're happy
ours.
to be here. And you notice we didn't disagree. We went right back to the status quo. Very rare Bob and I disagree. Very rare.
We should tape our collaboration because it's really a lot of fun as we share ideas.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
We've learned a lot from each other. And I'm so blessed to have Bob in my life.
And this
Well,
feeling is very mutual.
we feel blessed now to have you both in ours. So thank you.
you.
Okay.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
The
I'm going to go
listeners,
see some parents of a 6-year-old who's struggling right now.
take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye, Bob.
Bye, Sam. Bye. Bye, Lane.